used to live in a small apartment complex in the city, the kind that looks decent during the day but feels sketchy once the sun goes down. It was an old brick building near downtown, 4 floors high with thin walls and flickering hallway lights that buzzed like dying insects. I'd moved there because it was cheap and close to work, but it didn't take long for the place to start feeling off. The first weird thing happened one Thursday night around 11 p.m. I'd just come back from my night shift at a small diner, tired and smelling like coffee and grease. The hallway was quiet except for the hum of the vending machine near the elevator. As I passed apartment 3B, 2 doors down from mine, I noticed something strange. The door was slightly open. Not wide open, just enough that the chain latch inside was pulled tight. What made it creepy was that 3B had been vacant for months. The landlord told me the last tenant left without notice and no one had moved in since. I stopped for a second, staring at the gap. The hallway light above me flickered, and for a moment I swore I saw someone standing just inside the dark apartment, motionless. I blinked and the figure was gone. I told myself it was my reflection or maybe the shadows playing tricks, but that uneasy feeling stuck with me. When I got to my door, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate steps echoing down the hall. I turned around instantly. Nothing. The hallway was empty except for that half-open door. That night, I double-locked my door and shoved a chair under the knob, something I hadn't done since I was a kid. The next morning, I stopped by the landlord's office to ask if someone had finally moved into 3B. He looked confused and said, "No, still empty. Haven't even changed the locks yet." I told him what I saw and he just shrugged it off, saying maybe some kids broke in. But when he went upstairs to check later that day, he told me the door was locked from the inside, with the chain still latched. That didn't make sense unless someone was still in there. A few days passed without incident, but then small things started happening around my own apartment. I'd find my shoes moved from the door to the kitchen. The bathroom light would be on when I came home, even though I was sure I'd turned it off. One night I woke up at around 2:30 a.m. to the faint sound of footsteps again, inside my apartment this time. It was so soft I thought I was dreaming, until I heard a whisper. Not a word I could make out, just a low mumbling sound like someone talking through their teeth. I froze in bed, barely breathing. After a minute, I slowly reached for my phone to use the flashlight, but before I could turn it on, the whispering stopped. Then came the sound of the front door closing, quietly, like someone easing it shut. I spent the rest of the night sitting upright with every light on. The next morning, I checked the door. The lock was still engaged from the inside, but the chain was off, even though I always hooked it before sleeping. That's when I called the landlord again and asked if he could change my locks. He agreed to do it that weekend, but said he was short on time and would get to it soon. Of course, soon turned into a week. That week was hell. Every night I'd hear faint sounds, scraping on the walls, footsteps in the hallway, whispers in the vents. I started sleeping with my phone recording audio, just to prove to myself I wasn't going insane. When I played the recording the next morning, there it was. At 2:47 a.m., the sound of my doorknob turning, followed by a voice whispering, "Are you awake?" I almost threw my phone across the room. I went straight to the landlord's office with the audio, but he brushed it off again. He said maybe someone had the wrong door or a drunk neighbor got confused. I didn't buy it. The voice was inside my apartment. That night, I stacked a few pots and pans near the door as a makeshift alarm. I also pushed my dresser against the wall connecting to 3B just in case. Around midnight, I was scrolling through my phone when I heard something that made my skin crawl, a light tapping on the shared wall. 3 slow knocks, paused, 3 more. I didn't move. The tapping continued for nearly a minute, then stopped. After a while, curiosity got the better of me. I leaned close to the wall and whispered, "Hello?" For a few seconds, there was silence. Then from the other side, I heard a whisper, "I see you." I jumped back so hard I nearly tripped over the chair. The next sound I heard was footsteps. Someone walking quickly away from that wall through 3B and into the hallway. I bolted to my door, yanked it open, and looked both ways. The hallway was empty, except for one thing. The door to 3B was wide open now, the chain dangling. And inside, the lights were off. I should have left right then, but instead I grabbed my phone's flashlight and stepped inside. The apartment was freezing. Dust covered everything except a narrow trail of footprints leading from the door to the bathroom. They were bare footprints, too long, like someone had been walking without shoes for a while. I followed them slowly, my heart pounding. The bathroom door was closed. I raised my phone, turned the knob, and pushed it open. No one was there. But the shower curtain was drawn shut, and behind it I saw the faint outline of a person. I didn't even think, I ran. I sprinted back to my apartment, slammed the door, and called 911. The police came within minutes. They searched 3B completely, but there was no one inside. Just those footprints and a pile of old blankets in the bathtub. They told me someone might have been squatting there for weeks, using the connecting vents to crawl between apartments. When the landlord finally changed my locks and sealed the vents, the noises stopped. But that wasn't the end. A month later, I moved out. I found a new place across town and tried to forget about it. Then one morning, I checked my mail and saw an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo, a grainy picture of me asleep in my old apartment. It was taken from the hallway through the gap under the door. Written on the back were 3 words, "Are you awake?" I called the police again, but there was nothing they could do. No fingerprints, no clues. They said it was probably a prank. But every night since then, no matter where I live, I make sure to check the door twice before bed. Because I still hear those same slow footsteps in the hallway sometimes. And every time I wonder if he ever really left. It was the start of October when this happened. That weird in-between time when summer's gone, but the cold hasn't fully arrived yet. The air was crisp, leaves scattered across the sidewalks, and everyone in the neighborhood had started putting out their Halloween decorations. I remember that week clearly because it was the first time in months I'd actually felt relaxed. Work had slowed down, my rent was paid, and I just moved into a new apartment, a small studio on the 3rd floor of an old building downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it had huge windows overlooking the street, and at night I could see the orange glow from the streetlights reflecting off the glass. It looked peaceful. At least it did at first. The first strange thing I noticed happened around 2 a.m. on a Friday. I'd been up late editing some photos on my laptop when I started hearing what sounded like whispering from outside my window. Not like someone talking on the street. This was softer, closer, almost like it was coming from the glass itself. At first, I thought maybe it was the wind. The window didn't close properly, and when the breeze came through, it sometimes made that weird whistling sound. But then between the gusts of wind, I heard it again. 2 voices. Low, slow, like they were arguing but whispering. I froze and leaned closer to the window. There's a narrow alley behind my building, just a few feet of space between my wall and the next one. It's too tight for anyone to stand down there comfortably, but when I looked down, I saw something that made my chest tighten. 2 shadows. They were standing directly below my window, motionless, facing the wall. No flashlights, no sound of footsteps, just 2 silhouettes against the brick. I quickly shut my laptop and turned off the light, hoping they hadn't seen me. I stood there for a full minute, staring through the blinds, but the shadows didn't move. Then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, they were gone. The next morning, I went down to check the alley. There was no sign of anyone, no footprints, no cigarette butts, and nothing. Just a pile of dry leaves and an old trash bin. I tried to convince myself it had been my imagination, or maybe headlights casting weird shadows. Still, that night I slept with the blinds closed. A few days later, I was on my way home from work when I noticed something off about my window. From the street, I could see that someone had drawn on the glass, small circles like fingerprints or smudges. When I got upstairs, I realized they weren't smudges. They were marks. Tiny, perfect fingerprints pressed against the outside of the window, about shoulder height. My window is 3 stories high. There's no fire escape, no ledge, nothing someone could have climbed on. Still, there they were, maybe 10 small fingerprints perfectly lined up along the edge of the glass. I cleaned them off that night, trying not to think too much about it. But when I woke up the next morning, they were back. I told the landlord about it, half expecting him to think I was crazy. But instead he frowned and said, "You're in 3C, right?" Yeah, the last tenant complained about that too. When I asked what he meant, he said the previous renter moved out suddenly last fall, same time of year. Apparently she claimed someone kept tapping on her window late at night. I asked if there were any security cameras, but of course there weren't. He just told me to keep my curtains closed and ignore the city weirdos. I tried. I really did. But that same night, around 3 a.m., the tapping started. At first it was soft, tick, 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 like rain hitting the glass. Then it got louder, more deliberate. Someone was knocking rhythmically right against the window pane. I froze in bed. I didn't want to look, but my curiosity got the better of me. I lifted the corner of my blinds just enough to see outside. There was a face, pressed against the glass. It wasn't lit well, just faintly visible from the streetlight below. Pale skin, wide eyes, and this strange grin that didn't move. Whoever it was, they weren't blinking, just staring in. I stumbled back, heart racing. The knocking stopped immediately, like they could tell I'd moved. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then from behind the glass, a voice whispered, "You see us now?" I ran for the door, half ready to sprint into the hall, but when I looked back, the face was gone. The window was empty again, except for those same fingerprint marks smeared across the glass. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I called the landlord again and demanded he check the roof and alley. He reluctantly agreed. When he came back, his face looked pale. He told me the alley behind the building was completely blocked. No doors, no ladders, no access from anywhere. But on the outside of my window, there were scratch marks, as if something had been climbing up the brick wall. He didn't have an explanation. He just said, "Maybe raccoons," and walked off. Raccoons don't leave fingerprints. Over the next week, the tapping came back almost every night. Sometimes it was light, sometimes loud. But it always started around 3 a.m. And each time, when I got brave enough to peek, I saw nothing, just the reflection of my own scared face staring back at me. Then one night I decided I'd record it. I set up my phone on a stand facing the window, hit record, and went to bed pretending to sleep. At exactly 3:11 a.m., it started again. 3 slow taps, then silence. Then faintly a whisper right next to the mic. "Don't look this time." I froze under my blanket, too terrified to move. The tapping continued for almost a minute, then stopped. When I checked the recording in the morning, the screen was black. My camera had turned off halfway through, but the audio kept going. And in the last 5 seconds, you could hear it, 2 voices whispering softly near the phone. "He's awake." Not yet. I moved out 3 days later. I didn't even wait for my deposit. The landlord didn't seem surprised, just sighed and said, "Happens every fall." I never found out who or what was at my window those nights. But now every October, no matter where I move, I always make sure my windows are locked tight. Because sometimes late at night when the wind picks up, I still hear that faint tapping. And every time I can't help but wonder if they ever stopped climbing. It was early October, one of those nights when the air feels just cold enough to sting your nose and the wind smells like wet leaves and gasoline. I was driving home from visiting my parents in upstate New York, about a 5-hour trip, and it was pushing close to midnight when I hit Route 41. The road out there is long, dark, and surrounded by trees. Barely any streetlights, just those old reflective signs that catch your headlights every few miles. I remember thinking I should have just stayed the night and driven in the morning, but I had work early and wanted to get back. About 2 hours in, I noticed my gas light flicker on. No big deal, I thought. I'd passed a few small towns earlier. There had to be a station up ahead. I drove another 15 minutes before I finally spotted a glowing sign through the trees. Pine Hill Gas and Service. The sign buzzed faintly, half the letters burnt out. It looked old, like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. Still, I pulled in. The place was completely empty. Just 2 pumps in a small building with one flickering light in the window. As I got out, the air felt colder than before. The only sound was the wind pushing dry leaves across the concrete. I swiped my card. Nothing happened. The screen stayed black. I was about to try again when I noticed movement in the reflection of my car window. Someone was standing near the side of the building. It looked like an old man at first. Thin, maybe 6 feet tall, wearing a long brown jacket and a cap pulled low over his face. He was just standing there, still as a statue. I froze for a second, trying to decide if I should say something. Before I could, the man slowly turned and walked around the corner, disappearing behind the building. I waited another few seconds, then called out, "Hey, you open?" No response. I should have just left, but I really needed gas. So I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and walked toward the building. The glass door had a sign that said "Open," but the inside was dark, except for a single lamp near the counter. When I pushed the door, it creaked open easily. There was no one inside. Just a faint hum from a refrigerator in the back and the smell of old oil and coffee. "Hello?" I called again. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, uneven, coming from behind one of the aisles. I shined my light in that direction, but no one was there. The footsteps stopped. Then something scraped along the floor like a shoe dragging. I started backing toward the door when a voice said softly, "Need a fill-up?" I spun around. The old man was standing behind the counter now. I hadn't even heard him move there. He was smiling faintly, or maybe grimacing. It was hard to tell under the flickering light. Yeah, I said, trying to keep calm. Pump didn't take my card. He just nodded slowly and said, "Cash only." Been that way for a while? I looked around. The shelves were half empty, dusty. The register looked ancient. I handed him a 20 and said, "Just regular." Pump 2. He didn't take the money right away. He just stared at my hand for a few seconds, then looked up and said quietly, "You shouldn't be out here this late." I tried to laugh it off. "Yeah, I'm learning that." He finally took the bill, but when I turned to leave, I could feel his eyes on me, like he was waiting for something. Back at my car, I started pumping the gas. That's when I noticed movement again, out in the woods behind the station. At first, it just looked like shadows shifting between the trees, but then I saw a shape, a person, moving slowly toward the light. I froze. Then another figure appeared beside it. And another, 3, maybe 4 people, all walking in the same slow, steady pace straight toward the station. I wanted to shout to the old man, but when I glanced at the window, he was gone. The light inside had gone out. The pump clicked full. I yanked the nozzle out, threw it back, and jumped into the car. As soon as I turned the key, my headlights lit up the front of the store. And that's when I saw them clearly. The figures stepping out of the tree line. They weren't walking normally. They were twitching, heads tilted, arms hanging at their sides, moving in this weird, jerky rhythm like their joints didn't bend right. One of them stopped and looked right at me. I swear, even from 50 feet away, I could see his face, pale, mouth slightly open, eyes completely black. I slammed the gas pedal. Gravel sprayed behind me as I tore out of there, tires screeching on the empty road. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I could still see the figures standing at the edge of the station lot, all of them facing the road, motionless. For the next 10 minutes, I drove faster than I ever have in my life. No cars, no lights, just darkness and trees rushing by. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I didn't want to answer, but something made me pick up. There was a few seconds of static. Then a low voice whispered, "You left too soon." I hung up immediately and threw my phone on the passenger seat. No service bars. Of course. When I finally reached the next town, I stopped at a well-lit station that looked normal. Bright, clean, a couple cars parked out front. I went inside and told the guy at the counter what happened. He looked at me strangely and said, "You said Pine Hill Gas?" "Yeah," he frowned. "That place hasn't been open in years." I didn't believe him at first. He even showed me on his phone pictures from an article a few years back. The building had burned down after a fire started overnight. The article said the owner and 3 locals were found dead inside. I didn't sleep that night, and I still don't drive Route 41 after dark. Every fall when I see the leaves start to turn and that same cold wind hits, I think about that night, the flickering,